Thank you. Frau Dr. Bundesministerin, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm grateful for this opportunity to help you explore why climate protection is not costly but profitable, and what proven energy solutions could help take humankind off the self-endangered species list, to be replaced perhaps by the oil and electricity industries as we now know them. On both the demand and the supply side, the pace and depth of change is revolutionary. Over decades, Thomas Edison's incandescent lamps and then other types slowly got more efficient. But now white LEDs in each decade get 30 times more efficient, 20 times brighter, 10 times cheaper. So they will save most of the 1/7 of global electricity that goes to lighting, and expose a fatal flaw in utilities' business model, which since 1892 has been to sell a commodity, not a service or infrastructure, so greater customer efficiency reduces utilities' revenues, not their costs. What else changes this fast? LEDs turn electricity into light, photovoltaics turn light into electricity, and in the past 5 years, their meteorite strike has fatally disrupted utilities by making solar power cost less than just the fossil fuels, the dashed lines at the bottom for the United States, that we feed into power plants. And wind power, the lower aqua curve, is now so cheap that it often makes gas, coal, and nuclear plants shut down as uneconomic to run. Now, if America's total energy use had grown with the economy at the same level of energy intensity, we'd have used this much energy, but we cut that by more than half. And meanwhile, the total renewable energy output doubled, and yet had a cumulative impact 31 times smaller than the savings. Just in 2014, renewables grew briskly, but savings grew 3 times more, and no energy company foresaw this. General Eisenhower wisely advised us to make tough problems soluble not by chopping them into ever smaller pieces, but by expanding their boundaries to encompass what the solution requires. All 4 energy-using sectors, transport, buildings, industry, and electricity, save more energy faster together than separately. And all 4 kinds of innovation, not just technology, but also design, not just public policy, but also business strategy, can combine to make game changers while old industries are still putting on their boots. For example, in automobiles, weight causes 2/3 of the energy use, and removing weight leverages 7 times bigger fuel savings at the fuel tank. So ultralight, uncompromised electrified cars, better than 4 and then 2 and then 1 liter per 100 kilometers, have been designed and lately marketed, and BMW confirms that the carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries. Our new manufacturing technology that made this carbon fiber carbon cap in 1 minute 10 years ago can now make 2x2 meter complex carbon fiber parts in 1 or 2 minutes, and you can actually buy it from Diefenbacher, the great German Tier 1 press maker. So if we made all US autos so ultralight, we would save 1.5 Saudis or half an OPEC worth of oil at a cost of $18 per saved barrel. That buys the electrification. The ultralighting is paid for by a 2/3 smaller powertrain and radically simpler automaking with 80% less capital. Ultralight electric vehicles can spread and their prices can drop even faster with a temporary fee-bate, that is, rebate for buying an efficient new car paid for by fees on inefficient ones. The strongest of 6 national fee-bate programs in Norway gave plug-in cars a 22.3% market share last year, 34 times the US level with no fee-bate. BMW not only leads this revolution, but is also helping autos morph from pigs, that is, personal internal combustion gasoline steel-dominated vehicles, to SEALs, that is, shareable, electrified, autonomous, lightweight service vehicles. And cities are also starting to be designed around people, not cars. And we know how to make cost-effectively at least tripled efficiency airplanes and heavy trucks. So these opportunities keep expanding. In 1975, the US government and industry all said that the energy needed to make $1 of real GDP could never go down. A year later, I heretically suggested it could drop 67% in 50 years. So far, it's dropped 54% in 39 years. And yet, just the innovations so far can already save another threefold, twice what I originally thought, and a third the real cost. And 5 years later, even that is now looking conservative. Indeed, a method we call integrative design can often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. That's how I stay warm living near Aspen, 2,200 meters up in the Rocky Mountains, down to minus 44 Celsius. But my house does no combustion. That's so 20th century. And indeed, it has no heating system. Super insulation, ventilation, heat recovery, super windows that insulate like 16 or even 22 sheets of glass but look like 2 and cost less than 3, make it 99% passive solar heated, eliminating the heating system more than paid up front for the efficiency that displaced it, and saving 90% of the household electricity as well, still yielded a 10-month payback in 1983. Now, the central atrium, seen here in a February snowstorm, has so far produced 62 passive solar banana crops. Without needing to look like this, my house helped to inspire over 40,000 European passive buildings that likewise have no heating and roughly normal construction cost. And this works from Old Snowmass, Colorado to Bangkok, a climate range that includes nearly everyone on Earth. But wherever you live, integrative design gives many benefits from each expenditure. So the white arch you can see in the top of the upper middle photograph, holding up the middle of my house, has 12 different functions, but it has only one cost. Integrative design is accelerating. The 38% saving in our 2010 retrofit of the Empire State Building seemed pretty good until 3 years later, our cost-effective retrofit of another half-century-old big building saved 70%, making this difficult building more efficient than the best new U.S. office, which in turn is only half as efficient as my organization's new office, just opened, comfortable with no chillers or boilers or furnaces. And yet its technologies were all available over a decade ago. What has mainly improved is not technology, but design, the way we choose and combine technologies. So our new office is one of the 20 most efficient commercial buildings in North America. It's the most efficient in the coldest or next coldest climate zone. My favorite part of it is the 25 square meter nega mechanicals room, where I want to outline on the floor in industrial tape, like bodies at a crime scene, where the boilers and chillers were supposed to go before we designed them out. And we expect this building's cost premium with under a 4-year payback to drop to about zero with experience, just as in the German passive buildings. By the way, already this building in Bayern reportedly uses 3/5 less energy than ours, so that its rooftop solar cells make nearly 5 times as much electricity as all 3 stories use. Wow, I need to find out how they do that. Can public housing retrofits become super efficient too? Well, in Holland, the developer BAM and social housing corporations and public partners are collaborating on mass efficiency upgrades of ordinary apartments, so they will produce at least as much energy as they use. And by industrializing the retrofit process in the first 11,000 units, these innovators expect by the end of this year to show no need for subsidy, financing the net positive retrofit just from the energy savings. Now, industry can save $500 billion net present value dollars worth of energy just in the United States. Dow Chemical has already received a $9 billion return on a $1 billion efficiency investment. But there's more to do. For example, industry owns most of the motors that use 3/5 of the world's electricity. Half that motor power runs pumps and fans. Yet integrative design made a typical industrial pumping loop use at least 86% less pumping energy, not by getting better pumps and motors and controls, but just by replacing long, thin, crooked pipes with fat, short, straight pipes. This also shrank the pumping equipment and its capital cost. So this isn't a new technology, it's just rearranging our metal furniture as designers. If we did this to the world's pump and fan systems, it would displace about half the world's coal-fired electricity, with a payback under 1 year on retrofit and less than 0 in new build. And yet it's not yet in any industry forecast or official study, because it's not a technology, it's a design method. What does this mean for the electricity of the world, 3/5 used in motors? Well, from the fuel burned at the power plant to the end use, many successive losses compound, so only 1/10 of the fuel energy comes out the pipe as flow. But now turn those compounding losses around backwards from right to left into compounding savings, and every unit of flow or friction you save in the pipe saves 10 units of fuel cost pollution and global weirding at the power station. And as you go back upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper, and the total capital cost falls. Now, in over $40 billion worth of diverse industrial redesigns for leading global firms, our team has typically found savings around 40 to 90% with generally lower capital cost, or in retrofit, 30 to 60% with 2 or 3 year paybacks. The German potential may be somewhat smaller, but it's still very substantial. Now, the whole electricity industry, under this sort of pressure, from the demand side, is transforming from centralized, supply-focused, fossil and uranium-fueled and brittle to distributed, customer-focused, renewable, and resilient. But most profoundly, the information age informs, enables, and organizes customers to take power into their own hands. It's smart to sell customers what they want before someone else does. And customers are figuring out that they can buy fewer electrons, use them far more productively and timely, produce their own, and even trade them with each other. For example, Dutch customers can now buy renewable electricity directly from other customers. Here's the peer-to-peer website of Van de Bron, literally from the source, the legal electricity version of a music file swapping site. I met last year a German utility executive who lives in Holland, and he buys his electricity from the guy in the upper left because he really liked that cute piglet, and the price was right. And then he got a long handwritten Christmas card from his electricity provider. What utility can hope to compete with this level of customer intimacy? Both developed and developing countries are seeing electricity demand stall or even fall. Michael Lieberich, in his speech last year, gave a wonderful build graph. I'll just show you the result of what happened to demand for electricity even as the Australian economy grew, and therefore to the forecasts. And it looks like the revolution in demand and in rooftop solar could cut the 2020 revenues by roughly 1/5. In fact, disruptors are converging on the electricity industry from at least 8 directions. And these 8 pack-men of the apocalypse move fast. They hunt in packs. They multiply quickly. They feed on utility revenues. And they don't just add, they multiply and exponentiate. Together, they're creating an alien competitive landscape faster than most utilities, cultures, and stakeholders can cope. A year and a half ago, all central power plants were called dinosaurs. Too big, too inflexible, not even relevant for backup power in the long run. Who said that? It wasn't Greenpeace. It was Union Bank of Switzerland. Now, customers can swap rooftop photovoltaic electricity with the grid, but use storage to time shift power and save money. So for 5 U.S. locations, from Honolulu at the bottom to suburban New York at the top, for households on the left and commercial buildings on the right, the colored annual bars project what fraction of electricity use can be more cheaply met by solar without net metering and behind-the-meter batteries than by grid power from 2014 to 2050. And you can see from this development that the utility revenues could drop by half in the 2020s. Tesla's home battery price just moved everything 3 years further to the left. Now let's add a third disruptor, flexible demand. In a typical Hawaiian household over the 24-hour day, appliances are used at different times, roughly half while the rooftop solar is operating, the yellow curve. But the main utility had a bright idea. They wanted to confiscate any extra solar output and not pay for it. What would a customer do? Well, probably buy smart appliances that starting this year can conveniently move 80 or 90% of the household loads into the solar hours. So the utility would lose nearly all its windfall and most of its ordinary revenue. All 6 anti-solar tariffs we have lately studied turned out to be well-aimed boomerangs, which will actually expand and speed solar adoption. Of course, at the wholesale level, U.S. electricity prices are now widely undercut by the average prices at which wind power and utility-scale solar power are being sold on long-term contracts at constant nominal price, therefore declining real price, and these prices keep falling. They do represent or reflect temporary federal subsidies, but the permanent subsidies for non-renewables are generally larger. And modern renewables scale up in a fundamentally different way. We used to build giant cathedral-like power plants, each costing billions of dollars, taking many years to design and build. But now, each year, with about the same capital, you can build a factory that produces each year thereafter enough solar cells to generate each year thereafter as much electricity as your cathedral will ultimately make. So in this little experiment, for the first 10 years, you're already a factor 15 ahead on cumulative solar output. This is why solar worldwide scales faster than cell phones. And yet we are often told that only coal, gas, and nuclear plants can keep the lights on because they are 24/7, while wind power and photovoltaics are variable and thus supposedly unreliable. Let me explain why neither part of that statement is true. First, variable does not mean unpredictable. Here's how accurately the French grid operator in a stormy winter month forecast a day ahead the output of the country's wind farms, and I'll bet they wish they could forecast demand this accurately. Second, the reason we built the grid is that no generator is 24/7. They all break. And when a big unit fails, you just lost 1 billion watts in milliseconds, often for weeks or months, often without warning. So grids routinely handle this intermittence by backing up failed plants with working plants. And in exactly the same way, but often at lower cost, grids can handle the forecastable variations of solar and wind power by backing up variable renewables with other renewables of other kinds or in other places. So highly reliable power can come from a portfolio of largely or wholly renewable sources when they're forecasted, integrated, and diversified by type and location. That's how the former East German utility 50 Hertz got 49% of its electricity last year just from wind and photovoltaics with extraordinary reliability. Consider this even more ambitious hourly simulation for Texas, which has no hydropower and is not connected to the rest of the United States. Its 2050 expected summer load shape for a week can get much smaller and less peaky with efficient use. Then we can install enough wind and photovoltaics to meet, say, 86% of the annual need and get the other 14% from dispatchable renewables, geothermal, small hydro, solar thermal electric, feedlot biogas burnt in existing gas turbines, burning municipal waste, burning obsolete energy studies. That's my favorite. And this 100% renewable supply can then be matched to the load by putting the surpluses into 2 kinds of distributed storage worth buying anyway: ice storage, air conditioning, and smart charging of electrified autos, both fully deployed by 2050. Then we can recover that distributed storage when needed and fill the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand. And then only about 5% of the annual renewable output is surplus, so the economics should be good. Now, this is not just theoretical. some national grid operators already integrate variable renewables in this way. Germany last year was 33% renewably powered. The year before, Italy 33%, Ireland 22%, Britain 19%. But 4 other European countries with modest or no hydropower got about half their 2014 electricity consumption from renewables without adding bulk storage and with superior reliability. For Denmark and Germany, about 10 times better than America's. So the operators have learned to run these grids as a conductor leads a symphony orchestra. No instrument plays all the time, but the ensemble continuously produces beautiful music. So, in short, bulk storage of electricity is the costliest of 9 ways to make the grid more flexible, so it can reliably accommodate variable renewables. This is a purely conceptual and schematic sketch, obviously details will vary, of the supply curve, arranging these 9 options in order of typically increasing cost. But in general, bulk storage, the costliest bit, is seldom necessary. Particularly if you do, for example, what Denmark has done and switch, as they have over 3 decades, from centralized thermal plants in red, mainly burning coal, to distributed wind turbines in blue, mainly locally owned, and cogeneration in brown, often burning agricultural wastes. And Denmark has also been very nicely switching its grid architecture to a cellular pattern of netted islandable microgrids that normally exchange power freely, but if the grid fails, can fractally disconnect, serve local loads without interruption, and then resync and reconnect. That resilient grid architecture makes big cascading blackouts impossible. And many countries are also starting to find that the best renewable resources far away have about the same delivered cost as medium quality renewables near the loads. So that plus low speed and taller wind turbines and making wind power cost effective almost everywhere could often let more regional or local renewable systems displace supposedly necessary long-range transmission projects like the North-South corridors in Germany. Now, these tectonic shifts fit a bigger pattern that 60 colleagues and I mapped for the United States 5 years ago. Reinventing Fire showed how the U.S. could, by 2050, need no oil, no coal, no nuclear energy, a third less gas, using tripled efficiency and quintupled renewables to run a 2.6-fold bigger economy, $5 trillion cheaper in net present value than business as usual, emitting 84% less carbon, needing no new inventions and no acts of Congress, but smart subnational policies, the transition led by business for profit. And so far, the United States is approximately on this trajectory. Now, our Chinese consortium's similarly rigorous new synthesis, to be published in a few weeks, shows how China could, by 2050, achieve 7-fold higher energy productivity, 12-fold higher carbon productivity, clean air, 4/5 less coal, $3.7 trillion cheaper. And Reinventing Fire China was written by the Chinese government's best energy modelers for the authors of the 13th five-year plan. So to solve the energy problem, we just needed to enlarge it and integrate it. And the results may at first seem incredible, but as Marshall McLuhan said, only puny secrets need protection. Big discoveries, he said, are protected by public incredulity. But a troubling gap is opening between where the market is headed and where many giant energy companies concentrate their attention. Managers understandably focus on the need for price to exceed cost, but in focusing so intently on cost and margin, many forget that value must also exceed price. If competitors offer a better value proposition and take away your customers and revenues, it doesn't matter whether you can profitably run a traditional energy company. And when that value proposition changes, U.S. history suggests that the markets can flip with breathtaking speed, as indeed you've seen in the German electricity markets. Now, if you look down New York's Fifth Avenue in 1900, you have to look quite hard to find the first car. 13 years later, you have to look even harder to find what might be the last horse I'm not even sure there is a horse. The horse and buggy industry thought it had decades to adapt, but Henry Ford made the Model T 62% cheaper in 13 years. The fraction of households owning a car went up tenfold, from 8 to 80% in 10 years to 1928, 3/4 of them financed by this invention of DuPont and General Motors called car loan. Well, today, photovoltaics just got 80% cheaper in 5 years. That's accelerating. 3/4 of California rooftop solar is innovatively financed, and Ford's and Edison's industries are merging. This horse and buggy thinking is dangerous, but still rather common. As the late oilman Maurice Strong once said, not all the fossils are in the fuel. But DuPont's former chairman, Edgar Woolard, reminds us that firms hampered by old thinking won't be a problem because they simply won't be around long term. They're forgetting that the pace of transformation, as these pictures show, is set not by incumbents but by insurgents who are not inhibited by the incumbents' legacy assets or business models or cultures. Moreover, investors flee even before customers do. Capital markets keenly sniff out disruption, and if they think you're in or even headed for the toaster, they don't wait for the toast to get done before they decapitalize you and reinvest in your successors. That's how the stock price of Solar City, which just became a utility, has moved compared to our number 4 U.S. utility, Exelon. Or how an automotive startup called Tesla Motors gained half the market cap of General Motors while selling 0.6% as many cars. Now, investors still bear scars from the failure of big, strong companies that got too old and slow to survive the IT transition, although IBM did survive a near-death experience. But investors got rewarded by their successors. Many investors now sense that the energy industries are starting to be transformed beyond recognition, so they're getting skittish. And these changes are happening well within current planning horizons and even executive tenures, faster than many firms' cultures can tolerate, creating a formidable leadership challenge. As Jack Welch said, if the rate of change on the outside is greater than the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. So which of the great companies on the left will be brave enough to make that perilous crossing, as E.ON and RWE began, at least before government policy muddled their journey, and join the firms on the right? Which category will you choose and encourage? Today's energy transformation isn't just fundamental, it's elemental. The first industrial revolution was the age of carbon, creating our prosperity and the world's mightiest industries, from coal and oil and gas. But now this obsolete age of carbon is giving way to the modern age of silicon. Silicon microchips and telecoms and software turn people from isolated to networked, and systems from dumb to smart. Silicon power electronics make electricity interconvertible and precisely controllable, replacing fiery molecules with obedient electrons. And silicon solar cells enable the ascent of energy from mining the fires of hell to harvesting the breath and radiance of heaven. I want to end with those for whom this transition is most urgent, the 1.2 billion people who live in darkness off the grid. With family income around $2 a day or less, they have little prospect of getting or affording grid electricity. And these impoverished people pay about $38 billion a year, 1/5 of the total cost of global lighting services, to produce very inefficiently from kerosene 1/1000th of the world's light, plus huge health costs and carbon emissions that would rank 8th among nations. But now they can banish darkness and teach their daughters and sons to read. An entrepreneurial village woman can lease or sell them this photovoltaic, high-temperature lithium battery, Dutch microchip control, and state-of-the-art LED package that sits up on a Coke bottle or hangs from the ceiling. And it pays back in weeks or months against kerosene lighting. It will produce a very bright light for 10 hours on one day's solar charge, or the fourth setting down for 150 hours on one day's charge. And you can finance it on the smartphone that it recharges through its USB port. So no longer buying that kerosene is getting a perpetual annuity equivalent to a month's extra income per year. There goes the last bit of John Rockefeller's 156-year-old kerosene business. Which of these offerings is more exciting and lucrative and transformational? To which strategy would you entrust your company's fate and our common future? Germany's choice of the disruptive energy future, enabling the new system, not protecting the old, could just save the world. Thank you all for your good work and your kind attention.